Dr. Zephyrian Kex adjusted his 6 optical sensors as he reviewed the data for the 3rd time that cycle. The readings couldn't be correct. No sentient being could endure what the human subject had just experienced and remain conscious, let alone coherent. "Run the calibration sequence again," he commanded his assistant, Dr. Vexhai, whose crystalline exoskeleton shimmered with nervous energy. "Sir, I've run it 14 times. The equipment is functioning within normal parameters." Vexhai's voice carried the harmonic undertones that indicated stress among her species. "The human, it's still asking when the real test begins." Kex's primary eyes swiveled toward the observation chamber where Subject 247H sat calmly on the examination table. The human, a male specimen they'd designated as Marcus, was examining his arm where the pain induction array had been attached. Small wisps of smoke still rose from the contact points. The Galactic Research Consortium had been studying newly discovered species for over 2 millennia, cataloging their physical and psychological tolerances for the Great Archives. Pain threshold testing was standard protocol, a necessary measurement for understanding a species' limitations and survival capabilities. Most sentients reach their breaking point within the first 10 units of induced neural stimulation. The Zephyrians themselves, considered among the hardier species in the galaxy, typically managed 23 units before unconsciousness. The silicon-based Kethtar had achieved a record of 31 units, though they'd required extensive medical intervention afterward. Marcus had endured 147 units, and he was asking for water. "Perhaps our translation matrix is malfunctioning," Vexhai suggested, her exoskeleton now cycling through anxious color patterns. "Maybe the human's vocalizations don't actually indicate consciousness." Kex consulted his neural interface, pulling up the complete biological readouts. Heart rate elevated but stable. Brain activity consistent with alert awareness. Stress hormones present but not at critical levels. The human's physiology was responding to the pain. He was definitely feeling it. But something was fundamentally different about how his species processed the experience. "Activate the communication array," Kex ordered. A harmonic chime indicated the connection was established. Marcus looked up toward the speakers, his facial features arranged in what their cultural database identified as a smile. "Hey there," Marcus said, his tone carrying what the translation matrix labeled as casual friendliness. That was interesting. Kind of reminded me of my first time getting a tattoo, except it lasted longer. "Are we doing psychological testing next, or do you want to crank up the intensity on this first?" Vexhai's exoskeleton went completely transparent, a reaction equivalent to fainting in her species. Kex found himself grateful that Zephyrians couldn't experience that particular biological response. "Subject 247H, Kex began, consulting his protocol manual. "You have just experienced pain levels that would incapacitate most known sentient species. Please describe your current state." Marcus stretched, joints popping audibly through the audio pickups. "Well, my arm's a bit tingly, and I've got what feels like the mother of all muscle cramps, but honestly, I've felt worse after a good workout. One time I ran a marathon with a stress fracture in my foot. Now that was pain." Kex's optical sensors whirred as they attempted to focus. "You continued ambulatory function with a structural bone failure? Oh yeah, happens more than you'd think. Humans are pretty stubborn that way." Marcus examined the testing apparatus with curiosity rather than fear. "My grandfather used to tell stories about his military service. Got shot 3 times in one battle and kept fighting until they physically dragged him to a medic. Family trait, I guess." The implications began cascading through Kex's analytical matrix. If this was representative of human pain tolerance, it explained disturbing reports from the outer colonies. Stories of human settlers surviving catastrophic equipment failures, walking for days with injuries that should have been fatal, continuing to function in environmental conditions that would kill most species within hours. "Dr. Kex," Vexhai whispered, her form slowly regaining opacity. "What if pain isn't a limitation for them? What if it's just information?" Marcus had moved to the chamber's small window and was peering out at the research station beyond. "Nice setup you've got here," Very sterile, very scientific. Reminds me of the hospital where my daughter was born. I was there for 36 hours straight during labor. My wife did all the hard work, of course, but watching someone you love, in pain, that's a different kind of test altogether. Kex accessed the human's cultural files, searching for context. What he found made his optical sensors dim with something approaching horror. Humans routinely subjected themselves to voluntary pain for reasons ranging from aesthetic modification to recreational activities to spiritual practices. They had entire cultural concepts built around the idea that suffering led to growth, that pain was temporary but achievement was permanent. Subject 247H, Keck said carefully. Would you say pain is important to your species? Marcus turned back toward the speakers, his expression thoughtful. Important? I'd say it's essential. Pain tells us when something's wrong, when we need to adapt or overcome, but more than that. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Pain is how we know we're still fighting. It's proof we haven't given up. The moment you stop feeling pain is often the moment you stop feeling anything at all. Vexhai was running, calculations on her personal interface, her exoskeleton flickering with rapid data streams. Dr. Kex, if their pain tolerance is this high, what about their determination, their psychological breaking point? The question hung in the chamber's recycled atmosphere like a toxic cloud. Kex realized they weren't just studying another species' physical limitations, they were glimpsing something far more profound and terrifying. Humans didn't just endure pain, they transformed it into fuel. I'm recommending immediate termination of physical testing protocols, Kex announced, his voice carrying official authority. And I'm flagging the human species for special consideration by the consortium. Marcus waved cheerfully at the observation chamber. Same time tomorrow? I'm curious to see what else you've got. As the research team began their emergency session to redesign their entire testing paradigm, none of them noticed Marcus quietly humming an old human song, something about walking through valleys of shadows and fearing no evil. The galaxy, Kex realized with growing unease, had no idea what was coming.